Now, the elephant in the room here, of course, is the context at the moment as to where this obsession with Islam at the moment comes from. It's not to do with, as Michael mentioned before, Islamism. If it was simply to do with Islamist attacks, then there'd be a campaign in the media at the moment against atheism, because the three people who were murdered in Chapel Hill recently, the three Muslim women who were murdered by someone who was inspired by Richard Dawkins, someone who considered himself a new atheist. But there's been no backlash against atheism as a result of that. So the context, of course, at the moment is the rise of a wave of Islamophobic violence across Europe at the moment. Michael might deny that the existence of Islamophobia, but in France at the moment, the racist National Front are leading the polls at the moment. You've got the rise of the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn in Greece. This is the context for a wave of attacks against Muslims across this continent. And so the question of free speech really isn't an abstract one. Free speech has concrete consequences, when it can be acted upon to demonise and further marginalise one of the most already marginal groups in European society today.
The Chapel Hill murders, like you, I was obviously concerned about any murders. And I, particularly when the reports came out that the murderer was allegedly an Islamophobic atheist. So I checked his website, and I would suggest that you do the same thing, and I checked various places that he operates online, and he's not Islamophobic. He's a Native American Republican who supports gun ownership. He supported the right of Muslims to build a mosque at Ground Zero, which was a very controversial position in America. He has many Muslim friends, and he says that he prefers his Muslim friends to Christians. And nothing in what he has written suggests that he has anything against Muslims. He is opposed to this is going back to the point I was making earlier. He's very strongly against religion as an idea. He is very friendly towards Muslims. Now, he also seems to be I don't want to be assessing the man's state of mind, but he seems to have behaved very irrationally with regard to control freakery about parking outside his apartment, which is the trigger for that particular incident. He has been involved in a number of websites where he is obsessed about road traffic violations and parking violations, and he also has, because of America, has access to firearms. So that if you examine what has happened there, you will find that you have somebody who I suspect, although he does almost say this, that as somebody who identifies ethnically as a Native American and supports the rights of minorities within America and therefore identifies with the rights of Muslims as a minority within America, you will find, if you actually go through his website, that far from being Islamophobic in terms of hating Muslims, that he dislikes the ideology. He doesn't dislike it as much as he dislikes Christianity, and he prefers Muslims to Christians.
So maybe ask where you got that from.
From his own website. He's a Facebook page, which people superficially jumped on and said, "Oh, his Facebook page says he's an atheist." Actually, his Facebook logo was "Atheists for Equality." Now, he is actually. I mean, he's obviously a very disturbed person, but he certainly didn't dislike Muslims. Or if he did, he wrote exactly the opposite everywhere that he was online. So have a look at his website, and you will find it, or his Facebook page. I'll send you the link.
No, I saw his Facebook. I saw his Facebook. I didn't see that on his Facebook page. I went systematically through all his posts, so I didn't see that.
Well, I've gone through it systematically, and I'll give you a link from my blog to an analysis. I went back to when he started on Facebook. And went through everything, because I believe in trying to find the evidence for something rather than assuming things. And you'll find that his problems were not first of all, as I say, in terms of Islamophobia, I make a distinction between disliking the ideology, which I think is valid, and disliking the people, which I think isn't valid. But if you go through his Facebook page from the start, not only does he not dislike Muslims, he prefers Muslims to Christians.
Was that many years ago?
No, it's the last. Well, he's there about 5 years, but I mean it's clear. It's a clear pattern, and as I say, he also, which is quite an unusual position for or would be quite an unusual position for somebody who hates Muslims, he actively supported the building of a Muslim mosque near Ground Zero when there was controversy against that. And he did that on the basis of defending the rights of minorities. In
well, I'll certainly check it. I mean, if this was what you say, then I think we should all check it out and find out for ourselves the veracity of that. Yeah. Though it doesn't necessarily mean he might not change his opinion later on, depending. But
you could equally say his biggest thing really was recently was supporting gay marriage, and yet nobody is saying, "Oh, here's this gay marriage supporter killing 3 heterosexuals." You know, I mean, you can't just jump on something that somebody is supporting and say that means that he hates people.
Well, okay. I mean, since the turn is a debate into what was the motivation of Craig Hicks. So, I mean, obviously, we get this because this is what his family says. The evidence came to light that the people who he had issues
his family.
With,
sorry, whose family?
Sorry, the family of the victim. Sorry.
Okay.
And that on the day in question, there was actually no parking violations by the actual. They actually took his threats earlier on into account, and they avoided parking on any of the spaces they had issues with. So this is very recent now. It turned out there's actually the parking motive theory actually has been discounted. So maybe it was he just randomly picked people and out of all the neighbours, which were well to do but not Muslim, and it just happened to be about a unfortunate coincidence. But I think I will accept that. If this is what you found on his Facebook, then let's go and let's check it out and see for ourselves and see if there's anything.
And the other thing I would add to that is, by the way, is because there's a kind of casual, even if you say that he was an atheist, even if you're saying that his atheism is responsible, there's like kind of casual throwing of inspired by Richard Dawkins, as if Richard Dawkins is somehow encouraging people to murder people. I mean, that's an outrageous linkage to say that he was inspired by Richard Dawkins. He has a list of quotes from at least 100 different atheists and politicians on his page, and there might be one from Richard Dawkins or 2 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at his Facebook, he wasn't just saying I'm an atheist in the status bar and that was it. I mean, he was very fanatically anti-religion, like post after post after post after post.
Yes, but not anti-religious people. But not anti-religious people.
Oh yeah, well, I mean,
and in fact, pro the rights of Muslims.
Well, I think he was actually having a go at idiotic religious followers, and he would say, he put them in a bad light, perhaps, followers of religion too. But nothing that says kill all Christians or Muslims or whatever. Yeah, I would agree. He didn't say kill all of them, but people. But I think.
But it's more than that. He defended the rights of Muslims as a religious minority within America.
Well, I have to wait to see that.
Okay, well, I don't because I've seen it, but I accept.
Okay, yeah, because I mean this is new evidence you're bringing to light. So we'll check it out.
A narrow legal question. I suppose I'd slightly disagree with Abdullah's emphasis on giving racist groups a platform. It absolutely mattered that, for instance, at Oxford, when Marine Le Pen tried to use the respectability of the Oxford Union as a platform to spout her racist views, that people demonstrated outside, outnumbered her, and also in Newcastle outnumbered Pegida by the tune of hundreds. Because it matters in terms of making sure that these bigoted ideas don't actually enter the mainstream of political discourse in society. To make sure that that we don't lump the Front National together with any normal political party. These views are inherently conducive to hateful violence, and I think we have a responsibility as both Muslims and non-Muslims across Europe at the moment to make sure Islamophobia is nipped in the bud and doesn't take hold in Ireland.
At risk of being confused of being liberal, which I'm not, I'm quite the opposite, or libertarian, or whatever you want to call it. I actually come from an Islamic basis for the matter, which is that no matter how horrific or disgusting or repellent you might find anyone's particular ideas, in the platform of debate or the arena of debate, all is acceptable, and everyone has a right to access that arena and engage their opinions. Because the only way you're ever going to refute racists or EDL or BNP is if you give them the right to speak and then give their opponent the right to refute them on publicly, and people see their ideas falling down. What they'll say if you don't give them that platform is that they are martyrs and that people are denying them the right to speak and so on, and it just makes them look better and stronger, and they get more supporters that way. So I'm actually all for, no matter how horrific. I mean, I said the BNPEDL, they were the most strongest people against Muslims. They were saying that basically Muslims are fifth columnists, we're evil, we're whatever, we're going to take over England and spread Sharia law or whatever. That's what they've been saying, and I thought the best way to tackle them is in the midst of everyone giving them a no platform, we'll give them the platform. And I also thought it was quite funny as well, because they were saying that Muslims hate criticism, yet the only people that will give them a platform are Muslims. And they didn't actually realize that, and so they accepted the invitation, and they had a difficulty explaining to their followers afterwards why only Muslims would give them the platform to criticize Islam and Muslims, when everybody else who was not Muslim wouldn't. So I think that I should give them a platform, because they're going to spread anyway. You know, and no matter how small a minority of people are, I think everyone has a right to intellectual engagement, and you become the stronger for it, to see what, even if you're right and they're wrong, you become more aware of why you're right by testing it with their ideas or with their criticism. So I would disagree with that. But there is one point you mentioned about, and I agree with you, is that we shouldn't say, and I think it's wrong to say only Islamists would take offence at, let's say, the Charlie Hebdo or cartoons, or portraying Prophet Muhammad with a bomb in his turban. All Muslims, irrespective of who they are, what sector they are, whatever, they took offence. But it wasn't necessarily just the offence taking that was the issue. It was the worrying trend of this portrayal of Muslims as being evil, savage, violent, and barbaric. Because if you treat people like that, you get many of those who are disenfranchised amongst the Muslim community who will say, well, if we're going to be considered to be like this, we might as well act like this. I think there's a great quote from Shakespeare. Shylock said, you treat me like a dog before you had cause, so now I will bear my fangs. You see, it's a bit of Shakespeare. So it's not just with the Muslims. In America, you had, I think the police discriminate against black people, and then you had some black people were shot, and then in response, this one guy, in his anger and his rage, he shot two policemen. It was a black person. He shot two policemen. Does that mean that there's a problem in the black community, or the black community are predisposed to violence? No, it doesn't. In fact, unfortunately, it's a human reality of hatred, demonization, injustice, causing a reaction of more injustice, and it just perpetuates injustice in the world, and I think it's wrong. Obviously, I think killing the two policemen is wrong, and killing the innocent black people who weren't armed or by the police is also wrong as well. So it's got nothing to do with Islamism. It's got everything to do with humans and human nature, unfortunately. And I think that we should condemn all injustices across the board, but also pay attention to the plight of the Muslims in France, who they can't express themselves. Women can't express themselves by wearing the niqab. They can't go to school, be educated, wearing what you wear here. They don't have, women here with hijab won't have this right in France, in good old free speech France or free expression France. It doesn't exist. And of course you insult the French anthem, the French flag. Even apparently the French president is actually illegal to do so in France. So their pretensions of free speech is just media showboating and trying to claim that they're the moral high ground. They don't. They criminalize people. They arrest people, and I think that perpetuates the injustice amongst the Muslim community. And some amongst them, like you had in the black community in America, will take matters into their own hands and do injustices as well. It doesn't justify what they did, but they so victimized they feel that they will react in the wrong way, in completely the wrong way. And no matter how much as Muslims we preach, I say it to many of my platforms that we should always not be violent. We should always react in a way that is better and more enlightened way. You're always going to find people, generally Muslims, who are actually not religious, who react very violently. According to many of the reports on extremism, so-called radicalization reports, they've actually shown the evidence is opposite. The more irreligious a Muslim is, the more likely they are to commit acts of terrorism or violence. And the more religious they are, the more knowledgeable they are in Islam, the less likely they are to commit acts of terrorism. So the problem is really, it's us trying to suppress a human problem that's happening using religion. But obviously we can't force every Muslim to be good Muslims, and you'll get some who will go outside Islamic law and go outside, will be outlaws and do bad things.
I have a question for Mr. Abdullah. At the beginning of your speech, you said that we are going to discuss about free speech, and we should put restrictions to free speech because religion is considered by some people as part of their identity. So if you are offending their religion, you are offending them.
No, gratuitous is insult, not offence. I don't like the word offence. It's too unclear and vague.
But I just want you to clarify for me. There is a surah. There's Surah Al-Jum'ah, which is translated as a Friday surah, and the 5th verse in that surah, it says that those who are entrusted with the Torah, which is the book of Jews, and everyone knows, and who do not take it on, are like donkeys. So, could you please clarify for me, because I'm a bit confused. Is it what is the intent, since you spoke about the intent of insulting? Is this an insult?
Well, actually, there's also narration about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I will answer that verse, but let me just show you where it's used elsewhere. Referring to basically Muslims who are claimed to be scholars or learned people, and they don't act according to knowledge of what they possess. They too are donkeys. It's actually referring to anyone who's knowledgeable and doesn't act according to the knowledge they have. They are and not understanding of that knowledge. They are like donkeys who carry books. Finish the quote. Donkeys, because a donkey doesn't carrying books. Just because it's carrying books doesn't mean that it knows what's in the books, right? And it's showing that it's by not being enlightened by the books, it just behaves it just behaves as an animal. What distinguishes itself from animals is knowledge and enlightenment. So it's not an issue about Jews there. Jews weren't mentioned as Jews are like donkeys. No. It doesn't say those of the Torah are donkeys. No, it does not say that. It refers to anyone who is meant to be learned, but does not act according to what they know. They're just like a donkey carrying books. The books don't benefit the donkey at all whatsoever, and nor does it benefit anyone else, just being on the back of the donkey. And according to the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, his sayings, he also referred to that to anyone else. So it's just a saying about. It's actually not about Jews. It's about people who claim to be scholars of knowledge, and yet they're not benefited by their knowledge.
So you think that the term donkey is not insulting?
An insulting term.
Insulting.
Well, it's clearly not.
In my culture, if you call someone a donkey, that's very insulting.
Well, if someone particularly, if it says Bob, this guy called Bob here, he's a donkey, then that would be perhaps insulting, yes. But it's not. It's a very general, almost a parable or a metaphor. Really, it's a metaphor, really. So there's nothing insulting about a metaphor.
Can I address that? I think this is one of the problems with religion generally is that because religion bases its views about reality and morality on these sacred texts, every time something comes up, an interpretation has to be created that crowbars the new information into what was written several hundred years ago. And instead of just being able to say, I suspect if that wasn't in the Quran, and if somebody had asked you, say, Joe Smith said that Jews are donkeys, you'd go, that's a terrible thing to say. You know,
he didn't quote it.
I understand.
Doesn't say that.
Okay, I understand. I'm saying pretend it's not in the Quran.
Someone bring up the quote.
I understand that. Pretend it's not in the Quran. Okay, pretend it's not in the Quran. Right. Pretend that it's in Charlie Hebdo. Okay, and that somebody has said in Charlie Hebdo that Jews are who are carrying the Torah are donkeys. I suspect that you, as if it wasn't in the Quran, your instinct would be to say, yeah, no, that based on what you've been saying about insulting people, would say, yeah, I think Charlie Hebdo got it wrong there. I don't think that they should have compared Jews to donkeys, even in that metaphorical way. But because it's in the Quran, you have to find a way of reconciling this statement, which would otherwise be an insult elsewhere.
It's not in the Quran, though. It's just a straw man arguing.
Okay, wherever.
Bring me an example in the Quran. We can discuss it.
Okay. Well, I'll give you another. Okay, I'll give you an example from the Quran that
you say is deliberately insulting.
Well, not that I say it's deliberately insulting, but that illustrates the point that I'm making. Is in the there's a verse in the Quran that says that you're to flog adulterers. Okay. And it gives the
fornicators,
fornicators, adulterers, and if you flog them 100 times, and then it says after that, don't let your compassion for them prevent you from doing it, because you have to do what Allah said. I'm paraphrasing roughly, but I'm sure you remember the verse. Okay, now to me, what that suggests is that there was something in the Quran, there was something in the original version. You have to flog these people, and it seems likely to me, as somebody who doesn't believe in Allah, obviously you have a different belief if you believe that Allah wrote it. or dictated it. But it seems to me likely that this instruction to flog people, that people who were using their compassion were going, that doesn't really seem right. It seems disproportionate. I don't want to do that. And in fact, the other bit is not only don't let your compassion stop you, but also you have to do it in public, so that it's clear that it has been done. Okay, so it seems to me that there are things like that where these sacred texts corrupt what would be our normal morality. That normally, if it wasn't in the text, you would look at certain things and go, and you just use your own compassion and empathy and fairness and reciprocity and cooperation and justice, and you would say, I would come to this conclusion that shouldn't be done. But if somebody says, but it says in the Quran, or if you're a Christian, it says in the Bible, then suddenly you have to spend this huge amount of intellectual energy in trying to reconcile what you might otherwise believe with what's written there, instead of being able to say, there's a lot of good stuff in that book, but they got some things wrong.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, this is on a tangent. This is actually red herring to the actual discussion we're trying to have, because this is about legal laws and what the Quran says about legal laws. The example that was brought up, he actually didn't cite the actual quote. If someone could please cite the actual quote. If people actually hear the actual quote, it's not actually what it says, the paraphrasing of what it says. So this is really red herring in this matter. But even on the issue of the punishment for public fornication, not for people who fornicate in private, but people who go out and actually have sex in public. Okay, it's prohibited under Irish law and UK law too. You can't go have sex in public.
That wasn't the point I was making.
I know, but I saw this story about this US soldier, and it showed him as a very human person, who made a few mistakes in Iraq, and he seemed very sad and depressed and about it, and he was like, and very regretful of some of the mistakes he's made, and it's like, and you see it, and you go, oh, poor guy, what did he do? He was in Haditha, he shot an entire family and raped a girl, I think it was a 9 or 10-year-old girl, and then shot her afterwards. That's what he did. But if you see him and how sad he looks, you'd feel, oh, poor guy. He seemed to have. He says that he wasn't his. He didn't want to go to Iraq, or he was sick and tired of it. He was depressed. He had mental issues, perhaps. Oh, poor guy. But when you see what he did, and someone says to you as the prosecutor in the case against him, if you were the court prosecutor, and you say, oh, he seems so regretful, and they say, look, don't let compassion prevent you from doing your job. He did something that was bad, and so his punishment, which is life imprisonment, or I think it was just life imprisonment or whatever, that's what he has to do. That's what has to happen to him. So in Islam, we view public fornication as a very egregious crime. It's not execution or capital punishment per se. It's just flogging and so on. You might say that's
just flogging.
Well, yeah, because it's not execution, is it? It's not killing the person.
Well, that's a kind of low hurdle really for ethical behaviour. He's not killing him.
Well, I would say it's better than putting people into human zoos like prisons and so on, and depriving them of their family for years. I think that's actually more inhumane.
Yeah, or just saying, or you just saying, okay, you had sex, now go home and enjoy yourself.
No, it's not that. It's basically from the Islamic perspective, a person that commits fornication is not only attacking the institution of marriage, but because we don't believe that humans own their own bodies, or God owns us, it would be akin to sex without consent, because the owner of the body is God, and you don't have God's consent, and hence it's sex without consent. That's why it's very egregious in our moral worldview. But whether you agree with that or not, I'm not asking a secular person to agree with that perspective, and I'm certainly not advocating that for Britain or any country. I'm saying that this is what the Islamic understanding is, in an Islamic state of which Muslims have consented to basically implement the Islamic law. So really, the law is by consent by Muslims, and we consent to live under such a law by establishing a state. which is a different
Yeah,
matter.
well, other than the people
But
who are fornicating, as you put it, are having sex, as I would
in
put
public,
it,
not in private.
Okay, but they obviously
public immorality.
obviously by definition they haven't consented to that law because they feel that law is wrong, and then it comes down to what if
those people break their promises.
What comes down to is what is a proportionate response to it. But to a certain extent, the key point that I was making that I don't want to get dragged too far away from is the primacy of these texts and looking at them. Like if somebody says to me, if you had said to me, should you call Jews donkeys, I wouldn't go, well, Dawkins 467 says, I would just give you my opinion. We don't rely on what somebody wrote down as.
But that's more arbitrary, though. It could shift. I could point to the oft-cited example, of course, of certain countries in the last century, or even now, of which it's become popular to hate a certain minority based on their race or their religion or their skin color, and because it became such in vogue, it was deemed to be moral to do bad things to those people. So I don't want to put more. Forgive me if I don't put stock in human beings being the arbiters of their own morality, because they generally choose to be very nasty to other people if they make themselves the arbiters of morality. Now, just to go back a bit, we're not discussing here what should be the punishments for fornicators. Yeah. By the way, this debate is not about that. That's for a different discussion. We're talking about an issue of free speech. And I'm actually arguing from an Islamic perspective, because I think that the Islamic perspective in this matter is something that people can generally agree and accept, which is that intellectual critique should be allowed. Gratuitous insult against which impinges the dignity of human beings and should have some restriction. Now, we agree with that in principle on many other things. My only argument today has always been, let's just be consistent about it. And just because a person might not have a religion or be anti-theist or against religion does not mean now that they should be selective or discriminatory, saying this applies for everyone else except those people because I have an issue with them. I think I'm only trying to advocate for consistency in applying the principles.
Well, can I ask you one other question? I'm sure we're probably close to time, but when you were saying that God determines. When you were talking about the fornication, I presume that carries wider. God determines things, and humans are incapable of wisely interpreting anything other than what God says. Okay, or not interpreting of deciding outside of what God says.
I'm saying what David Hume says, which is often human morality is based on their tastes. And do you really want to trust the taste of potentially wacky people?
Okay,
charismatic.
Well, let's like that. Well, you see, the difficulty there is that some people will consider some Islamic teachings. No, I didn't say people. Some Islamic teachings to be wacky, and they're free to have that opinion. Exactly. So what you come down to, and this is the key. What I was saying at the start, in my first contribution, is who determines. If you have your God telling you this, somebody else has their God telling you something else. Somebody else has David Icke telling him that George Bush is a space lizard. Okay, so and then you have atheists saying, well, we'll just look at it on the basis of evidence. So with all of those things in a pluralist society, who determines, in your view? Like, does the Islamic perspective get precedence, or how is the balance and the compromises to be teased out?
Okay, well, it depends. It would depend on the social context. So, in a let's say Muslims in a Western society, we are under a covenant or contract with the citizen contract, as Rousseau would say. So we abide by the laws, and if we have any issues, we would advocate for it. But really, even under Islamic law, we don't impose Sharia law, Sharia on non-Muslims. So Christians don't have to give up eating pork, and historically never gave up eating pork or drinking wine under Islamic states. In medieval Iraq, you had pig farms in Christian areas because that was what they wanted to do. So Sharia is not for those people who don't believe in it. And are not Muslim, and so that's why I say it was by
depending on the country, obviously, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia.
I'm not going to talk about post-colonial secular creations. I'm only talking about what Islam was before the British came, and we're not the only country the British colonialised, right? So I'm only going to talk about what was applied in Islamic history under Islamic laws, and under Islamic laws you had open debate, open discussion, and so on, and the people were free to criticize, to make even strong invective. Even if you see some of the translations written in Arabic, originally written by Christians in Arabic and by Jews in Arabic, about what they say about Islam, you think, wow, this is some of this stuff probably wouldn't even be allowed in England.
Well,
but they were allowed back
ask you
then.
then, and I assume on the basis of what you're saying that you're among these, where are the reformers of modern, what Islam has turned into, that would bring it back to what you're talking about in terms of what you're saying it was?
Well, herein lies the problem, because the people who want, not reform, but want to revive pre-colonial Islamic understanding are called Islamists, because they say, oh, you're mixing politics with Islam, and this is Islamism. But yet for 1,300 years, Muslims weren't secular. They were not. The Islamic caliphates were not secular institutions. Yet they were institutions where you had the flowering of science, the flowering of discussion. You had pluralism. You had multiculturalism, and so on under strictly Islamic regimes, strictly Sharia regimes. Yet, if any Muslim talks about reviving such a situation, you're called an Islamist and you're called an aberration. So those who are counter-revivalists are not only the Muslim regimes themselves who arrest and imprison Islamists, quote-unquote Islamists, but also the Western governments which support these regimes, happily not Ireland, so you guys are wise, but they support these Western dictators which are secular, like President Sisi, Bashar al-Assad, before Saddam Hussein, before he fell foul of American foreign policy, and many others. And herein lies the problem. We're prevented from actually changing our countries and returning it back to a much more enlightened state as it were. And this is what we're trying to do. But actually,
so you think the key is going back to Islam as, first of all, as being a combination of a religion and political system and judicial system combined, but without the policies that some Islamic states or some states today that say they are Islamic are
it's not a combination of anything. It's just a way of life. Only after secularism did they compartmentalize ways of life into what is a spiritual belief, almost a Protestant understanding of religion, and then a public religion, which they said that should be separate from life's affairs. That came after secularism, but all civilizations weren't secular. Like the Hindus would never call themselves Hindus. They said they were following the Dharma, which means law. Torah means also law. You see, so
but in the meantime, given that that's unlikely to happen in countries where Muslims are a minority,
this is
in the meantime,
from the discussion.
No, I think it's because it is the fundamental underpinnings of the attitudes that we're talking about in terms of freedom of expression. In the meantime, is it possible for Muslim revivalists, to use your term, to try to within a democratic pluralist society, to try to campaign for those things that you think should be implemented under an enlightened caliphate, but try to get them implemented under a democracy, under a secular democracy? Well,
no, because it's a non-Muslim country. Why would we want the laws to change for non-Muslims to be Sharia? Because they don't believe in the basis for Sharia. It would be absurd.
So, but I thought your argument was that there were elements of Sharia that are that in terms of the way that it used to be implemented pre-colonialism, presumably then are different to how they're implemented post-colonialism. So what are those differences?
Well, okay, I think we're getting off
yeah,
topic
but it's
here.
interesting.
So okay, well, we can have this discussion over coffee afterwards. But my discussion here today actually I have not advanced any Islamic evidence. I haven't advanced any verse of the Quran saying you should have this understanding about free speech because the verse of the Quran says. I haven't said this today. You just because I'm Muslim, you obviously brought up the issue, and obviously he brought up the issue about the Quran.
Yeah, but it is an Islamic
even
society
if I was,
that has indicted us here.
It's irrelevant. Islamic Society can have any debates on anything they want.
Sure.
But I'm not coming at this advocating you to accept the Islamic basis in order to understand my position. I'm saying this position itself is reasonable for any person to understand when you have principles, right? The Quran says to us Muslims that we're not to argue with the people of the book or Judeo-Christian civilization or whatever you want to or its descendants, unless we witness injustice. And injustice is really anyone contradicts their own principles, right? So if you're being consistent with your own principles, even if they're wrong, but I say, all right, fine, at least you're being just as you think it to be. But if you contradict your own principles or you selectively apply them on what you give a privilege to one, and you don't give you don't give the same to others, then this is where we can raise issues. So the only point I'm here to say is that we protect so much in terms of human dignity for many different identity groups, which we now define as identity group, which I would say is just superficial, such as race or gender and so on. I would say that the mind, the human soul of the individual is much more fundamental to their being than just the superficialities of their external shell, or just a particular preference in only one area of their life. So I'm arguing that let's be consistent on the matter. You don't have to accept Sharia. You can think that the Sharia punishment for fornication is wacky. Please do so if that's what you want to believe. But we're not discussing these matters. We're not discussing Islam. We're discussing purely the idea that if you already accept that there is restrictions on speech which is not necessarily inciting violence, then just be consistent about it. If someone came to me and said, I don't care about any restriction, whether you want to incite hatred, you want to demonize, you want to remove people's dignity, do so. I would say, well, at least you're being consistent about that. But now you have accepted the principle that that's not the case, not that super libertarian idea, then let's just be consistent about it. And that's my only argument here today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and I think even though we have strayed a bit from the actual topic, I think that kind of serendipity can be useful for a discussion, and it's one of the reasons that I prefer these type of formats than just simply having, two people debating, trying to defeat the other in a debate. So I think it's been quite a useful discussion. I'll just say I think we have quite a lot in common in approaches to certain issues. Obviously, we have I think our big difference comes back to that you believe that you are getting your sense of reality and morality from Allah, and I don't. And obviously that's going to mean that we diverge fairly quickly in terms of the underpinning of what it is we're trying to promote. And then the question becomes, what criteria do we use to determine these freedom of expression issues in a society where people have different underpinnings for whatever their beliefs are?
Well, I would finish off by saying that while my basis for my morality is perhaps different from yours, I think there is a common universal language of checking for consistency in a person's belief. So, and the Quran says, had the Quran been from anything other than God, you would have found inconsistency in it. Now, whether that's true or not is a different discussion. But what I do in debates, such as certainly political philosophy debates, and I think it's come within the realm of political philosophy to some extent, is to show or highlight inconsistencies in a person's belief. Whether they want to believe something I might not necessarily believe in, if it's fully consistent worldview system, I can't fault it. But if there is inconsistencies, it must be false. There must be a problem within it, or it can't be true, whatever basis you might take, whether you're a communist, you're a liberal, or whether you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or whatever. So today, my discussion, as I said, going back to it again, is that I only tried to highlight inconsistencies. But if someone came here today and said, I don't feel that any restriction on speech is required, maybe except incitement to harm, but if they want to be really consistent and say that humans always have the moral responsibility, whatever whispers in your ear, then you should be consistent and say that any speech, including incitement to violence, should be allowed, because just by inciting someone to violence doesn't mean they're going to be violent, right? You could say that, and I would say, you know what? You're consistent. I would say you're inconsistent with human nature, what you're saying, but you're consistent in your beliefs and so on. And that's really all I've been trying to argue today when I discuss what you call political philosophy ideas, is consistency. And I think that's a universal basis to show if something's right or wrong. Okay. خلاص؟ Yeah.
Round of applause for both our speakers.